discussed, Sharan, in the past was making sure that once this does come to fruition, if successful, that there's accessibility, obviously, for consumers. I'd like to get an update on more of that and how that's progressing, because you're starting to see certain companies starting to put certain patents on certain natural molecules. Do we see this kind of unfolding like big pharma, or are there certain protocols that are taking place to prevent that?
I think this is where the grey area is, right? If whether this is following big pharma or whether this is, following accessibility and compassionate access, special access, right? So I think there is a bit of a grey area. And again, it's all going to depend on regulations, right?
Right.
Kind of where those regulations go and where we land with the regulators. I
But
think,
do you not think the regulators will have a little bit more of an open mind to prevent, obviously, what's happened in the past, considering the current conditions that we're in? And sorry to cut you off there.
that's okay. Um, we can't speak to what the regulators are thinking. Again, their main objective is always going to be safety first,
Right.
right? Like whether it comes in efficacy, is one thing. Obviously the products have to be effective, but safety is definitely going to be something that's on their radar, and it's also safety from lack of efficacy as well, right?
Right.
So when we're bringing to them a natural product, we have to show that it's effective in a healthy population, right?
Mhm.
And you do that for all other products as well. But for something that, we're not looking at a single compound, we're looking at a set of compounds that could work synergistically together. We definitely want to show them efficacy in a healthy population, right?
Right.
So that's the main objective of this trial that we're doing, is to show that the regulators that, without having a single compound, that we are showing efficacy, and hopefully in the future an increase in efficacy.
Hmm. I like to ask this question from time to time, and maybe a question for both of you, where I have CEOs on and I ask, what are some of the important investment questions that need to be asked when looking at this space? But it's also equally, if not more important, from a medical research perspective. What are some of the key questions for somebody that is new to the space, deciding on what companies to invest in? But from a pure research perspective, what do you think are two or three really important questions that they should be asking? And Dr. Wood, will begin with you.
I think from a clinical and medical perspective, the paper recently in the New England Journal of Medicine is about as mainstream as you can get. So we work in an area, of course, where there's the cultural baggage going back to the 1960s and 70s, and the counterculture where psychedelics were being used recreationally. But now to have something in one of the, foremost medical journals of the world, where cardiologists and respirologists and infectious disease doctors will all be reading and learning about psychedelics, and the fact that this is clearly rapidly going mainstream. And I think the questions to be asked are about effectiveness and safety and side effects and comparative approaches. For some people, this type of psychedelic experience might not be the best thing. I I had this funny thing that I tell people when I was a medical student. The psychiatrist that was teaching our class said, that if somebody's relationship is having difficulties because there's mismatch between the couples in terms of their sexual interests, an SSRI might be really useful because SSRI diminishes interest in sex.
Right.
There may be some paths where people think an antidepressant is the approach that they want to take. Alternatively,
Right.
people might want to try something in a concise sort of 6-week therapeutic protocol that could get at the roots of their depression or their anxiety. And what these research papers that have been published show, people might rate as among the most meaningful experiences of their lives, and have a extremely positive effect on them, that they can put depression and anxiety in the rearview mirror in many cases, rather than simply managing their symptoms with a medication that might dull them down. So I
Right.
think, for clinicians, it's does this work? And that's the research that's unfolding in front of us.
Yeah. What is the feedback that you are hearing from peers, I guess, physicians across the country, learning more, believing more? Are they excited to prescribe this to their patients? Are you hearing anything like that, Sharon?
So that would be a question for Dr. Wood, actually. Yeah, seeing as I sit in the lab, so yeah.
Dr.
Yeah, I
Wood?
mean, I think for all of us, and Sharon would probably see this too, there is a level of desperation in the community for new treatments. So whenever, a mainstream media article comes out, usually, the next day my email inbox will be full with, my husband had a traumatic thing happen to him, or my,
Really?
my brother had this
Yeah.
happen to them. And they're just horrible stories of people with, panic disorder. They can't leave their house, or depression, and they're just not the person they were once before. And usually those stories have a narrative about, we've tried multiple antidepressants, we've tried, these different things, and if anything, things have gotten worse. So I think it's the demand from the sort of the population at large. And I think the medical community is just taking interest. Most physicians are busy going about their day, and this has probably invoked some curiosity. For mental health practitioners that have very, blunt instruments to try and help their patients, there's been tremendous interest.
Interesting to say the least, that's for sure. Last thing I wanted to ask, and obviously an important one, was the report that came out last week regarding the New England Journal of Medicine comparing, um, you got to help me out here, Dr. Wood, and how to pronounce that. Citalopram. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that crowd correctly, but otherwise known as Cipralex in comparison to psilocybin. But I'd like to get both of your reactions based on the report itself. Sharon, we can begin with you. But what was your take on obviously the research conducted towards the major depressive disorder?
Well, I've always said that, we're at the beginning of research here in these areas. All data is good data. Like, we want to see as much data come out so that we have peer-reviewed references to go to on, the products that are being used, the dosages that are being used, the regimes. So we have a comparative that's already been peer-reviewed, right? It's really important that we continue that trajectory. Again, data, right? So data for me is something that's reproducible, something that's sustainable. So I'm always going to have a look at whether data is reproducible and sustainable. So there are positives and negatives with all studies, and it was the same with this one, positives and negatives through the study as well.
Interesting. Dr. Wood?
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks again to the mainstreaming of this, and that it was in the New England Journal. If you just totally distill down what that study was, is it was the best possible depression treatment we have that's available in mainstream healthcare, with a very intensive psychosocial intervention added to it, which is unrealistic. But to create a blind and two equal studies, they got all of that extra mental health support. And then psilocybin, if anything, was the same, because it was better, but the confidence intervals just overlapped. So it wasn't statistically significant in a small sample, but every secondary endpoint showed a benefit of psilocybin in comparison to the best available thing we have. So there'll be more studies, but that study clearly shows that psilocybin is a very serious consideration for treatment for depression.
Yeah.
For Sharon and I, in our side conversations, we were kind of like, I wonder if it was a natural psilocybin mushroom extraction that wasn't just synthetic psilocybin, but had these other synergistic molecules there, if it might have had an even a better effect. So it's congratulations to the study team. Those trials are a huge amount of work, and one positive study, but it's a small study, and there'll be more. It's only 6-week follow-up for that trial, and they'll be continuing to follow those patients, and we'll have 6-month data. And I would not be surprised if those confidence intervals actually separate as there's more follow-up, particularly because lots of people don't like taking SSRIs every day.
Yeah.
And the people that had a benefit from psilocybin may have a persistent benefit going out over time. But the proof will be in the details when we see the follow-up paper published.
Sharon, you focus on the scientific side. Obviously, Dr. Wood, you're on the medical side as the chief medical officer. But the whole reason why we wanted to have you on today is just to get an idea of the synergies between the two of you and how this works. So if I'm an investor within Numinus, or I'm looking at this space right now, maybe explain a little bit more as to the two synergies and how they work. And more importantly, it's just what you're experiencing at Numinus, and I don't know if the word excitement is the right word, but just a lot of the positive feedback that you've experienced so far with where the company is right now and where it plans to go.
So
Go
I
ahead,
think,
Sharon.
yeah, this trial is definitely an example of how Evan and myself and the two teams have worked together to produce something, right? So on the science side, as far as the actual product itself, and then on the clinical side with the protocol and the trial. So I think this trial is actually a really good example of how we can leverage the capabilities and expertise on the primary research and then the clinical research, and produce results and produce data that is going to contribute to the value of psilocybin therapy.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Wood?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, Numinus is two businesses. We have a laboratory and all the laboratory activity. Our Health Canada license covers all the psychedelics. And Sharan always, says we're not a psilocybin company because she's doing so many interesting things there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also a clinical service network. And I think what we're fortunate in that we're able to do is we're able to marry those two things. So Sharon's the one who usually has the good ideas. Her lab and team has been doing botanical extractions for over 10 years. We think they're way ahead with what they're doing, and we're about safe and evidence-based access. So to your question of intellectual property and being able to limit and take a pharma path, we think that there's an intellectual property path that's focused on access and availability. And we think that the phase 1 trial is going to open up a great deal of interest in what the lab is doing and being able to source other groups, for instance, with psilocybin products or doing other things. And we think ultimately the discoveries that come out of that, when tested in a clinical environment, will enable all sorts of opportunity in the clinical context too. So we're lucky that I'll speak for myself, but I hope Sharon feels the same way. We're a group of people that when we wake up in the morning, we're excited to see our coworkers because we all get along really well, and we want to do something for untreated and ineffective treatments when it comes to mental wellness and mental health care.
Well, I think a lot of people would agree with me when I say this. We applaud both of you for obviously the changes that you're making and the opportunities that potentially this will translate into later on down the road. But again, great work. I know you're both busy, but we really appreciate you catching up with us here today, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.